Hey everyone, Spencer Hawes here, and welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today I've got an interview with Colin Ma. Now, Colin is somebody that has been building niche sites for a while now, and actually in 2020 had two six-figure exits that we're going to dive into. One site that he built from scratch, and another site that he bought and flipped really within a period of about 6 or 7 months. He's got a lot of really cool strategies for building a team, for finding content to produce and a content schedule, and then some link building strategies as well. And we dive into a lot of details about how to know if you're actually getting good links and things to look for that have worked well for him. And so these are tips that anybody that is either building a niche site from scratch or somebody that's looking to acquire a site or to grow a site once they've acquired it and then flip it. I think you're really going to enjoy these stories from Colin. Now, I've actually known Colin for a couple of years. He's a super smart guy, and he's involved in a few different things, including helping out a little bit with investing.io and also over at domainmagnate.com. He's not an owner in those companies, but he's just helping out a little bit. But he overall is building out his own team of employees, building sites, buying sites, and growing his business. So I hope you enjoy the story that Colin has to share, along with the tips and strategies that are in this interview. So with that, here's Colin. Hey, Colin, welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast.
Hey, Spencer, thanks for having me on the podcast. Been a long-time fan.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. You're active in the Niche Pursuits Facebook group, and listeners don't know this, but we actually met in person. It's been either 2 or 3 years ago at Traffic and Conversion Summit, which was great. We got to hang out and have dinner and chat business for a while, didn't we?
Yeah. And it was like at an after event, and, we were just making introductions, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm Spencer. And then I look at you, I'm like, wait, are you Spencer Hawes? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay. Like I knew who you were because you actually helped me get started on this journey like 4 or 5 years ago now. Niche Pursuits was one of the first blogs that I read in the space.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, we got to know each other a little bit then. And I know you've been working on a lot of different sites, building sites. You've sold some sites, and we're going to dive into that specifically. But for listeners that don't know you, what's kind of your professional background, and how did you get started with online businesses?
Yeah. So it was my senior year in college. I was studying computer science like a good Asian kid. And, I was on vacation, and my uncle has me read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I'm sure most of, if not all of you, are familiar with. And real estate was interesting, but I also live in California, and it's a little expensive.
Right.
And so it kind of just got me thinking, about long-term investments and, just getting income without a job. And I've always been a little entrepreneurial, but never really considered anything. So, I jump on Quora.com and started hearing about the different ways that people are making money online. Eventually I fall into kind of like affiliate marketing and people making websites for ads. And I just say, this is it. And so I just read about the topics and forums for like 6 months. I'm looking at niche pursuits, just reading topics and forums for like 6 months. And then it was like one weekend I was just, on niche pursuits, and I see finally an example of like what a niche site was, and it clicked. And this actually helped me start my first website, in that, I was at my parents' house. I look in the backyard, and we had a pool. Mm-hmm. And growing up, we always had these creepy crawlies, which are like these pool cleaner machines. I was like, okay, I think that's going to be a great niche. And so my first site was in the website, or in the pool space.
All right.
But, after I graduated college, I kind of started work as a software engineer for 3 years, building sites on the side, until eventually about 2 years ago, I felt stable enough to leave my full-time job as an engineer and just work in the digital marketing space completely. And so, now I have my own portfolio of sites. I have a team of 3 full-time people, 3 part-time, and then a number of writers that we contract. And then in addition to that, I have some clients that I do SEO for, and then I also write for Investing IO community, just like a weekly newsletter where I review a lot of deals, talking about, deals that are for sale that are listed through Empire Flippers, Investors Club, FE International, a couple of other brokers. And then I also work with Domain Magnet to help them actually buy and sell websites for their portfolio and investors.
All right, so you got a lot going on. It went from not really knowing what a niche site was and then seeing an example, and that started the first light bulb, I guess, to now you've got full-time employees, you're working part-time, if you will, helping out investing.io and Domain Magnet, a whole lot going on. But before we get into all that, what did your parents think when you said, like, hey, I went to college, I'm working 3 years as a software developer, but I'm going to go build websites about pools and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that the entire 3 years where I was working as a software engineer, I was building up, my portfolio and gaining experience. So I would tell my parents a little bit. I live pretty close by and have a good relationship with my parents. And even though I said like I was a good Asian kid getting, studying computer science, my parents aren't traditional by any means. Like my mom was born here, my dad was born in South Africa, and my sister is an actress, and they supported her through that.
Cool.
So like, no matter what path I was taking, like it wasn't going to be as risque as pursuing like an acting career. So either way, it was going to be fine. But yeah, they were supportive, and super cool with it.
Yeah. So the pool website that you built, was that kind of the first site that you really had any success with?
Yeah, it was the first website that I started. I actually started with like an exact match domain. It was something like best vacuum cleaner, best robotic pool cleaners.com or something. And then like 2 weeks after launching, I'm like, this isn't the way to go. And then I eventually got more of a brandable domain within the space. So it was like blankpoolguide.com. And yeah, I mean, it was my first site, and I got really lucky because, I was writing for it myself, just like on the weekends, doing about 20, 25 hours a week. And then December it made, it's like first $80. And then in January, was like 500, February was like 2000. And then they just started really going up from there. And then as it made money, I kind of just invested more into like content and backlinks. But I was lucky in that my first website was a pretty good success.
Yeah, that's awesome. That can give you a lot of motivation to go out and either build or buy additional sites as well. So kind of bring us up to speed with maybe what you've done over the last 12 months, right? Like 2020, right? I know before we talked a little bit that you were able to build up some sites and exit those. So let's jump into that, kind of those stories. What did you build and what happened?
Yeah. So my probably two big successes were two flips that I did in 2020. One of them I built from scratch, and that was in the tech space. I worked with someone who was extremely familiar within the niche, kind of keeping it broad in respect to the seller or the buyer, sorry. But I talked to him and I said, I can just pay you for content, or you can have like a piece of the pie. And he just wanted to be paid for content. So at the end, I got a little lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty technical space. It was earning maybe about 4,500 a month. 75% of that was through Amazon affiliate. 1,000 or quarter of that was through AdThrive.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of blogs about this topic, but it does require some expertise to really stand out from the crowd and get a good site. And so I built that over 3 years, eventually selling that for, I want to say it was 120,000.
Nice.
In May. I want to say April or May. Yeah. And that was actually brokered through Investors Club. So they took like their 15% or whatever, but it was never listed. It was kind of just I was talking directly with Andre, who's the CEO, and he said, "Oh, we have like special buyers. Do you want to list your, or like, are you interested?" So I said, "Yeah." I don't like to list my sites typically through brokers, but this, Investors Club made it pretty easy, and they kind of just facilitated it as if it were a private deal. So
Yeah.
it was a smooth transaction.
So I'm sure listeners would be curious to hear, like, what's your process of, how do you, since you built this one from scratch, like, what are some of the big picture things that you think at least worked well in terms of, you've got your niche sort of in this technical space, maybe content and link building, like what's kind of the strategy that you're using to grow your sites?
Yeah, I mean, so it all started with keyword research. Fortunately, even though I wasn't like super aware of it, like I have had some experience in the niche, so that definitely helped with keyword research. I use Ahrefs and kind of just over a few days, just reverse engineer all the top sites in the space. And then from there, what I essentially do is when I first launch a site, I pretty much use the same stack. I'll go on WPX hosting. I'll use Thrive themes. It's changed a little bit since then, but I throw it on about 30 pages initially. And at the time, they would all be like money pages. So like all best of, or maybe some individual review pages. Now, especially with the most recent update, I've changed that process a little bit so that it's, you have some more supporting content. So it might be maybe like 10 best pages and then 20 supporting articles, like 2 each for each of the money pages. But yeah, I mean, I initially just kind of throw up like 20, 30 articles, and then from there drip feed like 2 articles a month.
So
And
I
then
want to dive into your keyword research process just a little bit. So you're looking at Ahrefs, you say you kind of reverse engineer what the top sites are doing. Are you looking at like what are their top pages, the ones getting the most traffic? Or are you looking at like what's the lowest competition keywords, right? That maybe aren't necessarily their highest traffic, but they look super easy to rank for.
got it. Yeah. So I know a lot of people are into like finding like low competition keywords. I don't do that as much.
Okay.
I like to work with, a little more of a budget when I start out a site. So I know how I have some more resources. To me, I think going after more competitive keywords, it definitely takes a little longer, but I think in the end has a higher ROI
Okay.
if you have the budget for it. If you're just starting off, definitely go for the lower competition keywords. But for me, where I'm willing to throw in, I have several $1,000s planned for content, several $1,000s planned for link building, even before it really gets out of the sandbox phase. So I'm confident to go after these, medium or higher competition keywords. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I take a look at some of the top pages, but I'll also just like go in Ahrefs, go to all the organic keywords that they rank for. And one of the first things that I look at is just I type in the word best to include. And I just see all the best keywords they rank for, just to get an idea of the niche.
Gotcha. Yep. Get all kind of
Yeah,
the money pages that they're obviously doing well with. Yeah.
yeah, that's the easiest way for me to understand, the potential of a niche. Like, I know you can make tons of money from info articles and ads, but I like going after affiliate content and then supplementing that with some informational articles. And so, yeah, it's the first thing I do when I look at a niche. Like, what are the best affiliate keywords that I can look at?
Yeah.
And they're not always, the best. The affiliate keywords don't always have the word best in it, but in this niche, it was definitely the best modifier.
Right. Yep. And like you said, you ended up something like 75% was Amazon Associates earnings, right, on that site. So that clearly worked out pretty well. And it sounds like since the latest update that you alluded to, you don't go quite as heavy on affiliate content. You're doing a little bit more informational articles that are supporting. Is that like you have seen things directly from the update on other sites? Because you sold this particular site, but what have you seen?
Yeah, I hate speaking to specific updates.
Yeah.
I don't like to spend a lot of time looking at updates and like why sites went up, why sites went down. I still pay a little bit of attention to it. I look at more like what people are saying and what I think makes sense for Google. And so I look at everything and I say, okay, does this make the world of site publishing better? And so like one of those things was one of the topics that revolved around like, okay, what was impacted by the update was like how many money pages there are. And people were saying, okay, there's sites with only money pages with low topical relevance. that are getting hit.
Yeah.
And so whether or not that's true, I took that information and said, okay, well, one, it makes more sense to not have just money pages, and the two, building topical relevance in general is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I've been taking that approach for close to maybe a year before the update. That was just more of a kick in the butt to make sure that you spend even more time and resources to do so. Because even before that update, my primary project right now is even about 40% info pages. And that number was going up a little bit.
Okay. Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Google is so hard to know exactly what they tweaked, right? Like nobody really knows. It's a black box. But I like that approach of taking like, does it make sense from a Google perspective rather than diving in whatever the top blogger or whatever Spencer says at Niche Pursuits. Like he doesn't really know anyways. So I like that approach though, of kind of thinking bigger picture, like what makes sense for the future to make your business really the best possible. So any other sort of content strategies? You kind of give us a quick rundown of how you're doing some of your keyword research. Any other sort of things that you do that you feel like have worked well in terms of content or on-page SEO?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like I don't do anything super fancy. Like it's creating relevant content clusters. Like I mean, my content's like pretty decent. Like we usually hire someone who does have specific experience in the niche. So I know some people hire writers for like $10 per 1,000 words. But to me, that's like when you think about creating like a brand or a company, you want a good product. And if you're doing a blog, the content is basically your product. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I don't go, super high end, but I go someplace or, at a level where, they are native English speakers and they have some expertise in the niche. But for interlinking, I just make sure that, we do really good interlinking and, there's particular ratios that I keep track of. And so probably, most of the stuff I do has been talked about before on a number of blogs. But I think one of the biggest things that we do a little differently that I kind of got from Matt Diggity is that, we categorize all of our anchor text. And this is for both backlinks and internal linking so that, if you have best vacuum cleaners, any keyword with best or vacuum cleaners is like one type of anchor. Mm-hmm. And then like click here or this article, that's another type of our anchor. Mm-hmm. So we have like 4 or 5 types of anchors that we categorize. And then we just look and calculate the percentage that we're sending to each page. So, if we have like 10 links going to like best vacuum cleaners, maybe like, I think we do like 8 of those 10 are going to be some form of a keyword anchor. Mm-hmm. And then the remaining like, 2 is going to be like a brand or like a topical or a different type of anchor.
Right. Okay. So roughly like 80%, something like that. You try to, that takes a lot of work to kind of figure out what those percentages are. I mean, are you just like using spreadsheets or Screaming Frog or something else to like do that?
Yeah, so we just use a spreadsheet and we basically just log it every time we add an internal link to kind of like the sheet that calculates the ratios. And then when we're creating new internal links, we say, okay, well, we have, 80% of the keyword anchors, let's add a non-keyword anchor.
Yeah.
And so, it's not perfect. Like you're almost never going to get exactly 80%, but as the number of links go up, it becomes more important. And so it's just an approximate guideline.
Sure.
Right. I mean, just always do what makes sense within the article, and we want to make everything look natural as possible.
No, that sounds good. So let's talk about other link building, right? It says you mentioned that you set aside a budget for content and pretty decent budget for link building as well. So what's kind of the link building strategies for this tech site that you mentioned?
The one that I had sold last year?
Yeah, the one you sold last year. Yeah, what worked well there?
Got it. Yeah. So when I do link building, for me, a lot of people will only build links to like the money pages, but to me, again, that's just super unnatural. So one, I make sure anywhere from like a third to half of the links that I'm building are going to the homepage, just because that's natural for a lot of websites. But then two, even if you're looking to rank the money page, if I have, let's say, if I want to send 20 links to that money page, one, I'm going to spread it out across a couple of months, just to make that, again, look natural. Like 20 links out of nowhere going to a new page is just too risky.
Right.
But then two, I want to distribute how I'm sending those links. Like I'm actually not going to send all 20 of those links to that page. It might be, maybe 10 of those links go directly to that page, and maybe, another 10 go to info articles supporting that page, for example. That way, the link juice can kind of like pass through into that money page, but you're also ranking other content as well. And that's more in line with my, the recent strategy that I created in the year and a half. That's less focused on money content and more focused on creating info pages and actually getting these info pages to rank.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people are just like, yeah, just create info pages just for topical relevance. But, I actually also want them to rank so that they're actually bringing, tangible value to the site, because it's hard to measure topical relevance, right? But if you can say, yeah, this page earns $10 a month, that increases the site's value by $300, $300, $400. And that definitely justifies the cost of an article.
Yeah. So, like what type of link building are you doing? Like, is it outreach, guest posting? What's working for you?
Yeah. So at the time it was actually, and so all of the direct deliberate efforts were through a couple of vendors. I've been in the game for 3 or 4 years now, and there's a couple of vendors that I actually like that have, good prices, good actual links. At this point, like I've started to recognize where most of like the popular PBN farm or the popular blog farms are.
Yeah.
They're not PBNs, but they're, quote unquote blogs that just send tons of links and they're on like everyone's list.
Right.
So I avoid those. And, I basically just say, okay, I want 10 to 15 links per month. And I reach out to like 3 or 4 different providers, and then get those built out by them. And I intentionally reach out to several providers just because I don't want just like one place where, my business can fail. And then that just makes sure that when they all get new inventory, I get notice of the newest inventory. The second way that it built links was, the content was pretty good. It was written by, someone who was maybe not quite an expert, but pretty damn knowledgeable of the experience of the niche. And so we actually got a lot of natural features in some relevant blogs. And then also like through a lot of forums. So like this type of niche, like it's very popular for users and people in the niche to go on forums and talk about the niche, and they would quote, mostly a lot of like the info, sorry, not a lot of the info, some info articles, but a lot of the money pages where they'd be like, okay, well, like you should get this product for this, or like this website says product for this. And so some of the forum links were no follow, some were do follow, but I'm sure that helped tremendously just build natural trust with Google.
Right.
In addition to the links that we were actually spending the time and money to build.
Yeah. So the providers for links, are you willing to share who you use? You don't have to, but I know listeners probably want to know.
Yeah, at this point, probably not. As soon as I share them, people will start hitting them pretty heavily, and it's taking me some time to build them. But, I would say like, don't be afraid to try new people on Facebook. Like I met all these people on Facebook groups just through trial and error. And I've worked with, I've quote unquote fired more link builders than the ones that I continue to work with. And so it takes time. It's a process for sure. So as soon as you find like someone good, all that time and energy was definitely worth it, because they're going to continue to deliver that good product, especially with link building where there's a lot of crappy vendors.
Yeah. So maybe you can give people a little bit of insight into how they can know if they've got a good vendor, a good provider, right? Like what should they look for to know that, hey, this provider isn't using the same sort of blog network that everybody's using that you referenced, right? Like that clearly it's bloggers that, yeah, they're willing to accept niche edits, or, they're linking to everybody all the time. How do you avoid those neighborhoods?
Yeah. So probably the easiest piece of advice, if you have a website and you have an email set up on that email or on that site, you're probably getting a ton of spam of like people just saying like, hey, I have like these 30 lists for you. I haven't looked into those too much, but I suspect those are all like probably coming from like the same group of people, and that's probably like some link farms.
Yeah.
But there's two ways. So, one, look at a lot of people's lists, and sometimes you have to just buy a couple of links to look at the list. But over time, you'll start to recognize a lot of the sites. And then two, just, when you place orders, look at the links, look at the metrics. So I always make sure sites have at least, 500 organic traffic, DR of, 20 plus. It varies, depending on the site and niche. So, I'm okay. Like if it's super relevant, I'm okay getting, a link from a site that has less traffic and less DR. But generally those are pretty good guidelines. And then I also make sure that, the graph on Ahrefs isn't just like a sharp decline.
Right.
Usually a good indicator that it's kind of fallen out of favor with Google.
Right.
But for me, I say DR. Actually, that's not true anymore. I look more at traffic than DR in general. The reason for that is DR is just an approximation tool. But if Google's actually sending traffic to these sites, they like it for whatever reason.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, but an interesting thing, particularly in the tech niche where this is a problem, sites with good organic traffic can be a little bit of a trap if you don't look at the actual organic keywords, because some of these sites are built only to sell guest posts, and you can tell. So they're not on all these lists that like some other sites are, but if you look at the keywords, they're ranking for like, watch movies online or like solarmovies.net and like these weird keywords that like these sites aren't going to last. Yeah. And they're just using some strategy just to sell guest posts. So if you're in the tech niche, I would be super aware of that, just to double check that doesn't happen to you. But then also with link providers, once you pay for that link, track that link, make sure that it's up. I use link tracking software to make sure that it's up. And, sometimes the links go down after a few months. And if you're paying anywhere from, $20, $50, $100, $200 for a link, like, yeah, you can spend like $5-10 a month on link tracking software. Because if your vendor is good, they will be willing to replace some, if not all of the links. Right. And so with one vendor that I've used, even though, maybe 20% of the links go down at some point, he replaces all of them. And so I've, it's probably been like 20 or 30 links that he's been able to replace for me.
Yeah, those are some good tips that people can, use, sort of the skills, right? Going beyond, hey, just use this vendor, of like being able to analyze, who's good, what are link neighborhoods to avoid, and good tips there. So it sounded like you also had a second site that you flipped last year. Is that right? So let's jump into that. When did you buy it?
Yeah, I bought that site in December of 2019.
Okay.
And I actually sold that in July of 2020.
Okay, so only about 6 months, 7 months.
Yeah, it was a quick flip. And so this site, it was an affiliate content site, and its primary products were info products. And so
like digital courses or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't Amazon affiliate,
right.
4 to 8%. This site was getting 50% commissions. And, I saw the network that it was on. It was on ShareASale.
Okay.
And I know that you can negotiate a lot of payouts a lot of times, or like higher payouts with, your existing affiliate relationships. So I thought, okay, that's one thing that could be improved. It could definitely add some more pages. So when I bought it, I was like, okay, the first thing I did as soon as escrow closed, I emailed my affiliate manager. I'm like, hey, we're doing X amount of sales in a month. Like, can you increase commission? So I was like, yeah, we'll move it from 50% to 75%.
Wow.
So, that site, I think when I bought it was making, I don't know, $3,500 a month. So going from 50 to 75%, only a 25% increase, but that's a 50% increase in earnings.
Right.
So just like that, out of the gate, it started earning, close to $4,500 a month.
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, you can't do that with Amazon, right?
Yeah.
And so I love opportunities like that. Yep. Very cool.
Yeah, you can't do that with Amazon. And so That was all the traffic was spread across like 4 pages, which is a little more risky than I would like. For a site at that level, you probably want it much more evenly distributed across maybe like 15, 20 pages.
Mm-hmm.
But because I saw this as an upside, I was okay with that risk. Whereas really just 4 pages ranking. And because when you buy a site, if your site's depending on 4 pages, like it's pretty high risk, especially, if you're buying a site for, I think I bought it for 80,000.
Okay.
And so, but if you're buying a smaller site for $20,000 or $30,000, you're gonna have just 1 or 2 pages that are really ranking. Like that's pretty normal.
Right.
It's just how sites start ranking with Google. But yeah, I mean, I got that commission increase, and I said, okay, well, let's also work on CRO. And I'm not a CRO junkie by any means. I think this is actually like the first time where I actually did CRO. But what I did was like I changed some button colors. I added a table at the top of the money pages. And then I added a sticky widget in the sidebar, and also in the content.
Like for the best selling product that you were selling.
Yeah, and this is the
Yeah.
first time I had done it, and that actually boosted conversions by like 15%. Just through those two tests I did at the same time. So adding a sticky in the sidebar, and then one in the footer. So like as you're scrolling down and you see, okay, this is the best product. As you continue to scroll down, that product or like just that button, that CTA would remain on the bottom. Whereas on the sidebar, it was like, okay, like this is the number one, these are the pros, and then the CTA.
And what tools were you using, both to like display the sidebar if there's any special tools and the A/B testing software?
Yeah, A/B testing software, I didn't use anything fancy. I was just doing it manually.
Okay.
With Share Sale, you get a pretty good insight of like the conversions and clicks. And so I was kind of just tracking in a spreadsheet, like conversions, traffic, that data. As far as, the CRO, I was looking at Hotjar. I use the free version of Hotjar,
Okay.
which is a heat map tool just to see where users are looking and clicking on the site. And then for that tool, I think it was Elementor Pro where I was making those edits. Usually I'm a Thrive guy.
Mm-hmm.
Thrive Architect is pretty good, but it's, I think, not as robust as Elementor Pro. And so that's one thing that I tested on Elementor Pro that I really liked, and was able to get good success. So basically within the month, we had maybe about a 70% increase in revenue.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
And so what else did you do? I mean, that's obviously a huge win right there out of the gate. Did you just kind of let it ride? Did you build new content? What else worked?
Yeah, so from there, it was just those were like the quickest wins that I saw. I did some internal linking, which is something that I always do for new sites, where it's kind of just like implementing them into our system. Nothing amazing there, but we started hitting content in the niche pretty heavily. Like I think we were doing like, well, not super heavily, but 15 or 20 posts a month for like 3 months, because the niche is so large, and they were all info articles, or sorry.
Mm-hmm.
They were digital product articles.
Got it.
So all the money pages, all of the affiliate offers were these digital goods. So the commissions were on the low end, like 15%, and then as high as like 50%, apart from the original 50 to 75 that I had requested. But yeah, the commissions were great. And, actually by the time I had sold it, none of those had really like come to fruition. Like they had started to pick up in the SERPs and rank, but none of them hadn't started making any money yet. So all like when I had sold it, it was just based off the revenue off of like 4, maybe 5 pages. So maybe we added like one more page that was making some money.
Right. And so you sold it in like July of 2020. How much did you sell it for?
I sold that for 115. So yeah, it was a like $35,000-$40,000 profit.
Yeah.
I actually sold that through Empire Flippers. So not all, so maybe like 20K profit as far as the raw sale, but then for the actual earnings, we probably came up total maybe about 60,000, something like that.
Yeah.
No, a little less than that, but it was a good flip because I knew this had some quick wins, and then for some reason, I just wasn't feeling the niche at all. Like I just didn't like where it's at personally. So that's why I decided to sell. And then I think it may have gotten a little bit of a COVID bump. So I kind of wanted to capitalize on that.
Gotcha. Yep. That was definitely
Yeah.
right in the middle of everybody at home, March, April, May time frame, that sort of thing. So let's jump into like a bigger picture of what are you doing now in terms of, there's so many different opportunities. You could buy and flip a bunch of sites, you could build a bunch from scratch. Or there could just be bigger picture things. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, you trying to like build a bigger empire that, is totally different from like niche sites? Like, just kind of curious, are you trying to scale up or anything like that?
Yeah. So definitely trying to scale up the portfolio a little bit. I mean, so the high level, I don't really know. I'm not,
Yeah.
a lot of people like for the past like 4 or 5 years, I kind of always had an answer for that. But more recently, I'm not really sure where I want to be at in like 5 years. Like, yeah, I want a bigger portfolio, but I'm not sure exactly how big. I think one of the reasons why I have my hands in a couple of different places is just to keep the options open and figure out what I really want to do. For example, one of the benefits about working with Michael from Domain Magnet is they're setting up funds. And so I'm part of that process where I'm learning about it, seeing the legal side, the logistical side. That's kind of been very interesting to me.
And what's your role there? I mean, you're kind of, are you just helping out as needed, or do you have a specific like responsibility that you're doing on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, so my official title is deal manager. What I'm responsible for is looking at deals, websites to buy for Domain Magnet's portfolio, both private and public sites. So, I kind of scour all of the public listings, but at this point, I've been in the space for a couple of years, and I'm fairly active in the group. So people will come to me because they know that I'm always looking to buy.
Yeah.
Whether I mean, previously it was for myself, but now it's for Domain Magnet, and so now I get some inbound leads. So just through personal connections, and then I also help them sell some of their websites when they're ready to sell.
Okay.
So really, it's just I don't do any actual like SEO for them. I look at deals. I'll do some due diligence and then make my recommendations. But yeah, nothing too involved.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And since we're on sort of subjects of, I don't know if you call it a side hustle or what, but investing.io, how'd you get involved there?
Yeah, I I don't even remember how I got involved, but I think I've been talking to Richard Patey, who founded the newsletter initially, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, like, do you want to help me like write newsletter?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds cool." Like, I actually like writing. Um, I just don't do it as much as I used to. And then I review the deals anyway. So it was kind of just this perfect fit where, it's this like fun project, low time commitment, visibility. Um, that's, kind of giving back to the community, but also, some extra money in the pocket.
Yeah.
And so with that, it's very low involvement, spend a few hours a week writing up my review on deals through most of the public marketplaces. Every now and then I'll bring up some private deals, some private opportunities, but very low time commitment. But it's a lot of fun because people will actually send me private messages about just like thoughts on deals, and I'll be able to help them out in a pretty specific way. In that, the thing about on Facebook, like when I make a post, I get a ton of comments, ton of messages, but a lot of them, like, you kind of have to filter out who you respond to, I think. And I'm sure you understand this, where
Sure.
you get a lot of messages from people who maybe aren't as committed or serious. With the Investing IO community, everyone's paying for the platform. So everyone's like fairly serious or experienced. And so, they're going to take action on what you're saying. Because I love helping out people, but most of the time people don't take action. And then it's just kind of a waste of time in my eyes.
Yeah, the investing.io group is, I mean, it's impressive. I mean, any chance you have to work with somebody like Richard Patey and Travis Jameson, super smart guys, but then just everybody in the group as well. Like I'm in the group and I know a ton of the guys there. They're really successful entrepreneurs. And so if you have the opportunity to kind of exchange ideas and interact with people like that, it's a win-win, right? You get paid and you get to interact with all those people there. So I I think it's smart to be able to do that as well. So what are you currently working on? You sold your site in July, and did you buy another site, or are you just building some from scratch?
Yeah, so those were my two biggest sites. I always have a portfolio running, anywhere from like 5 to 10 websites. And so after selling those two, I had maybe a few sites that were a year old at that point, and then I built another like 5 sites over 2 months. So
Wow.
that's something that we had never done before. So that was kind of like a crazy 2 months where, I think at most over 2 months, we've built 2 sites. And so kind of going after, 5 sites in different niches, with our team, that was a crazy period. But so those are still pretty young. I think we built those like October, November. But there's one site that I started December of last year. So it's just over a year old, actually on an expired domain.
Okay.
And so that was really taken off. The trajectory on that site was doing really well, and still is. I was, just on its current trajectory. I was like, okay, maybe flip this in like 2 years for like mid high 6 figures. And then the December update happened, and the site got hit by about 40%.
Oh man.
So it wasn't terrible. I know other people were hit harder than that. And it's just like at that point, like I've been hit by enough updates. I was like, it's just part of the game. So that was probably like the first time I got hit by an update where I wasn't like just extremely sad and depressed about the site. But I just said, you know what, I'm just going to keep working on it as if it was never hit. And a month later in January, we're actually just under our best numbers. So it more or less recovered for two reasons. One, I think there was a small January update that I think undid some of the hurt that the December update did. And then two, we started, well, actually, no real two. I mean, I think a lot of it was the January update, but I think it helped to just continue our normal process. We kept building links, we kept, doing articles so that, they all started to get indexed and ranking, as well as I think actually the biggest thing for this site that I've done differently is our content cadence. For this site now, and since probably November, we've been publishing about one post a day. And, for me, that's a lot of content for a site.
Yeah.
Usually we do one to two posts a week, maybe they're 3 or 4 for bigger sites. But I've been reading this theory about like content velocity is a ranking factor, and big sites just start ranking. So it's like, okay, the site's making enough money and we're seeing enough traction. Let's try this out. And so we've been just hammering it with content, doing one post a day on average. And I think that might be another factor, but it's just really hard to take and attribute one thing that you're doing to like why a site is doing well or poorly. So, yeah. But that's my theory.
Yeah. So how much content does that site have now, approximately?
Now, it probably, off the top of my head, it probably has like 250 articles.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And so we've done probably half of that in the past 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So, no, that makes sense. I think there's something to be said for content velocity. I haven't actually tested that, but at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a lot more content anyways that ages over, call it, 6 or 8 months. And so, it's not a bad thing anyways. So you mentioned a little bit that you've got a team. What's kind of the roles of everybody in your team? What does that look like? Just, if people are wanting to maybe scale a portfolio of sites, maybe they can get some of those insights on how they might be able to build a team like that.
Yeah. So I would say probably the first person to hire, even if they're not in-house, would be a freelance writer. When I first started, I spent, probably 6 to 8 hours on a single article when I was working on my pool site. And these were like 4,000, 5,000 words. And it's not that I'm a slow writer. I think I'm a fairly quick writer in that I do close to 1,000 words an hour. but it was just a pain, working full time and then just pumping out like 2 articles a week, easily like 10 to 15 hours on top of format and everything else. So writers definitely the first thing I would recommend hiring. And then secondly, people to kind of like format the content. So
Right.
I never refer to the people I work with as VAs. I think it's kind of dehumanizing. Um, I prefer to give them like kind of like real roles and titles. And so like instead of like content designer or sorry, like a formatter or VA, I call them like my content designers. It's a little more of a fun title. And so, you know, for me, I hated one, writing, and then two, just formatting those articles. And I think when you hire people, you can, the same people, like depending on who you are, you shouldn't hire the same person as someone else. Just it should reflect kind of like gaps in your own interests and expertise. But like for me, I hate design. I'm not good at design. And I hate repetitive tasks. And so like that was like the next clear hire, just hiring someone to be able to make things pretty, look good, and actually care a little more than I do about how the posts look. And that's awesome because I've been working with the same person for like 3 years now, and they'll be like, "Hey, I think for this new site we should do like a new, design. Like, what do you think?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds good. Like, just send me, mock-ups." And so like this person who actually like cares about it, they're doing a way better job than me.
Yeah.
They're putting the time and energy, and because if it were up to me, probably all like 20, 25 sites that I built would have like almost the same template. But because this person's like caring and thinking about it, we are actually able to vary it up and improve our designs.
Yeah.
But that's not a full-time role. The first full-time role that I hired for, um, he's been with me for like 3 or 4 years. He is, I call him kind of like a content SEO manager. So he's responsible for everything to do with content. So at this point for the uh, content creation phase, I just help with the initial keyword research. But, from there, he's actually, once we have all the keywords lined up, he'll choose the keywords, the info articles, look at how many words we should do, create the outlines for writers. So he handles all communication with writers, and then he'll edit them and then make sure he works with our content designers to get it formatted. So he basically takes care of almost everything to do with content.
Right.
And then I'm still teaching him a little more about like specific things for like on-page SEO. So as far as like, interlinking, anchor text selection, and some other trickier aspects of on-page SEO, he's still kind of figuring out. But it's a continual learning process as I kind of focus on more high-level things, and then he kind of focuses and learns more of what I'm doing. So he's kind of like my right-hand man there.
Yeah. So where have you found success hiring people? What any specific place that you found good people at?
Yeah. So a lot of people hire from the Philippines, and my two newest hires are from the Philippines, but I have had good success so far with hiring from Serbia.
Serbia, really?
Yeah. And the way I started that, my very first business partner, he and I actually worked on the pool site together a little bit. He was from Serbia, and, he was like 19 years old at the time. I was like barely any older, like 23, 24. And, we were like, "Oh yeah, like we need more writers just because like we need more help with this." And he's like, "Oh, like my old English teacher, could be interested."
Hmm.
So, this gentleman who's now, my full-time employee and manager, like he taught this guy English like 15 years ago. And then he started writing first in the beginning, saw that he was doing like great work. He was eager to learn. So eventually when my business partner left, I hired him full-time. But so far, like what I like about like the Serbians I've worked with so far is like they're all really hardworking, open to feedback. And they have a lot of integrity with the work that they do. And so I'm able to trust a lot of the work that they do and that they're going to ask the right questions. I think culturally, though, hiring people from like Philippines and Serbia for that matter, they're very different as far as like how they think, like, especially more so with, I think that's a bigger problem maybe with like a bigger problem with maybe some of the Filipinos that I work with thus far. Not saying this is true generally, but they seem to be better at like taking specific instructions for specific tasks. Whereas, if you're from the US, you're probably you're better at thinking like more higher level, and do more project planning and understanding the context more. But like these people who are usually like looking for overseas work as, quote unquote virtual assistants. Again, I hate that term, but they usually look for very specific instructions. And so for me, where I'm used to working with more like people from the US professionally, that took some adjustment, because I
Right.
would give them what I thought were good instructions, and they might be for someone who's from the US, but then, for people from other countries, it's not as clear. And like they don't really understand that they have to do more research and look into it. They just want everything kind of like tied up, listed as a very specific standard operating procedure or SOP.
Right.
And so for the first few months, fortunately, with the first guy I worked with, it wasn't a problem. But like the next few people from Serbia we had hired, we had to create very specific SOPs, because the first 2 months it just wasn't working out. But I realized that wasn't on them. That was more of a problem with us and the way we were delegating tasks. And so that was a big mindset shift that was kind of required of us and how I view things, because I do think very high level and I don't love getting into the weeds. And so I had to take the time to create these very specific SOPs with like video instructions, and just outline tasks.
Right. And I mean, the great thing, once you're able to do that, because I've had to do the same thing, I've noticed similar things, right? Is that once you do get a standard operating procedure, like it becomes a lot easier if that person were to leave, right? You can plug somebody else into that position. And it may require you to think through like all the steps so that you do get the quality content or the on-page SEO that you really wanted anyways. But that comes with the game, right? Like we're able to sort of take wage arbitrage, right, from people that are overseas, and it's a good full-time income from them, right? But for us, it's obviously a much more cost-effective way to hire, and so having to go through those steps, I guess, is not that big of a deal at the end of the day. So first of all, Colin, thanks for coming on the show. You've shared a lot of great strategies and tips, and of course shared a couple of your success stories. If people want to stay in touch with you or follow along with you, where should they go?
Yeah, so they can either just hit my Facebook up at facebook.com/Colin L Ma, and I can message this to you too, or through my personal email, colinlma@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Once again, it's great having you on the show. Going from building niche site on swimming pools, and glad you found Niche Pursuits and saw some examples that maybe helped out there as well. But yeah, it sounds like you're doing good things and scaling up and got a team. So I love it. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
Yeah, Spencer, thanks for having me. It's a blast.